Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good to have you here with us at 11:11 celebration, and this is especially to our visitors that are with us. We're glad to have you. Just a couple of quick things to announce. First of all, make sure you're registering your attendance. And I think the scanner thing hasn't been working consistently across platforms. So maybe skip that this time and just fill out the card. Bring it forward when we do our offering song here in a little bit. Speaking of offerings, all right, this is in my office. There's an amazing artist up in Michigan who just does wonderful sort of personifications with clay. You can't find him online. He just shows up at these art shows. We were up there in Petoskey, Michigan, and then people just suddenly show up out everywhere because he's world renowned. People won't get this. It looks like an image of Jesus, and it says Jesus, and it's a bank. So what is it saying? Thank you. So it's in my office. We've had the jar in here that says, "If you fear change, leave yours here." But I've decided, people were putting dollar bills and stuff in there, which is fine, but I want your change. I want your coins, and we want to use those coins towards our food bank and towards special ministries and stuff. So if you've got change in your pocket, which you are afraid of, then just drop it here in Jesus' mouth, and we'll use that. And I've just decided to allow some of my quirkiness to come out a little more boldly. As I'm getting older, I'm figuring my time is limited. I'm going to start bearing all, and then you'll really decide whether or not you want to stick around. So we've got some announcements very quickly. The Wine and Wishful Thinking is happening. Make sure the Connect magazines, or the newest one, is out. This one has some other features in it, and they're at the door. So different things happening throughout the church, so I hope you'll check that out. First We Drum is still 2 Tuesdays away. Not this next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after? Maybe. Something like, yes, he says yes. And speaking of he says yes, Laura Franklin and Daryl Parker, God, I hate to make you do this. Will y'all stand up? Laura had a birthday this past weekend. I was up in Oklahoma City, couldn't make it last night, but I heard something amazing happen. Daryl proposed to Laura. And here's the really amazing thing, she said yes. So lucky him. Well, congratulations, both of y'all. And they've both been an increasing, significant part of our family, so we celebrate with you guys. Can't wait to see that happen. That's it for our announcements this morning. As we continue, we're finishing up our series on why is that in the Bible, looking at the Bible, looking at this whole idea of what is this book, this library of books. And I'll share some final ideas with you. Again, as we introduce this theme, I hope you'll follow through the songs that sort of open up the questions, and as we sort of journey together through this morning and look at what we might think about this. Let's begin.
I wish I found some better sounds so one's never heard. I wish I had a better voice to sing some better words. I wish I found some chords in an order that is new. I wish I didn't have to rhyme every time I sang. I was told when I get older all my fears would ring, but now I'm insecure and I care what people think. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out.
certain smell would take me back to when I was young. How come I'm never able to identify where it's coming from? I'd make a candle out of it if I ever found it. Try to sell it, never sell out of it. I'd probably only sell one. It'd be my brother, cause we had the same nose, same clothes, homegrown, a stone's throw from a creek we used to roam. But it reminded us of when nothing really mattered. Out of student loans, a treehouse homes where all would take the ladder. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out.
Used to play pretend, give each other different names. We'd build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream about a space, but now they're laughing in our face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah, we used to play pretend, give each other different names. We'd build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream about a space, but now they're laughing in our face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out.
We used to play pretend money. We used to play pretend, wake up, you need the money. We used to play pretend money. We used to play pretend, wake up, you need the money. We used to play pretend, used to play the different names. We build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream about a space, but now they're laughing in our face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah.
Read the welcome.
I hate microphones. Good morning. As we move into our time of invocation, I invite you to sit and just think for just a minute about how our world tells us, and which then we consequently often tell ourselves, that we need to be someone other than who we are. And when you walk into Barnes & Noble or you scan the books on Amazon, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of self-help books that can tell you how to attain and how to become and how to be better. And so in these moments in our time today, I hope that we can allow ourselves to be. Not be better, not be worse, not be more beautiful or thinner or more elaborate or wealthy or whatever the fill in the blank is that we want to be. But let us just be. May we pray. O Holy One, we come as we are, broken and beautiful, a mess, yet held together. So as we find our space here in this place, may your Spirit be amongst us and be in us so that we might find that we might just be already, even in this moment, the people that you are calling us to be. We pray this in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
I want to invite you all to stand and sing with us now. We're going to rock out. And it's also time to bring your gifts to the table if you have an offering. Verse 1, all together now. You may be watching from a safe distance. You may be so close you can taste the blood. You may have headed for higher ground. You may be drowning in the flood. Come on. No matter what you do, say, love will find you. All right. Verse 2 with all you got. You may have lost what little faith you had. You may believe with all your heart. You may be pulling yourself together again. Oh. You may be falling apart. Hey, no matter what you do, oh, love will find you. Hey, bridge. One of you sees that love's a long lost friend. One of you can recognize her face. One of you runs to her with open arms. One of you falls down in disgrace. Another verse, here we go. You may see a million different gateways home. They think there's only one way through. You may be waiting for the kingdom to come. You may believe it's in you. No matter what you do, love will find you, yeah. No matter what you do, love will find you. Love will find you. Love will find you. That's some bouncy stuff, isn't it? Take a moment, offer one another a sign of peace. Would you please now? We're going to switch gears a little bit now. I'm going to invite y'all to sing this little song with us. Like this. Come and find the quiet center in the crowded life we lead. Find the room for hope to enter. Find a frame where we are free. Clear the chaos and the clutter. Clear our eyes that we can see all the things that really matter. Be at peace and simply be. How was that? Let's do it one more time. Come and find the quiet center in the crowded life we lead. Find the room for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are free. Clear the chaos and the clutter. Clear our eyes that we can see all the things that really matter. Be at peace and simply
So there's so many things going on in our lives and in our world in these very moments. There's Harvey that's still spinning, and many who are left in the devastation of the hurricane's path. There have been deaths this week of those that we care and love about. There are questions about where it is that we as a country are going and how it is that we can find and remain and be peace, both for each other and for the world. There are things within our minds and our hearts that are both beautiful and also in turmoil. And so, with all of these things that I have mentioned and the other images that are in your mind, I invite you in these moments to close your eyes and to simply be present. It can be hard to just be, but I invite you to stop, to picture in your mind the world in which we live in and who we are as a part of it, and just be with that. In the mess, there is often beauty, and in the darkness, there is always light. May we find a way to be in the midst of all these things. Amen.
Our readings this morning come from 1 Kings 19, 11 through 13, and then 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, and then a reading from Tacitus, the Histories, book 5, chapter 9. The Lord said, "Go out and stand at the mountain before the Lord. The Lord is passing by." A very strong wind tore through the mountains and broke apart the stones before the Lord, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. After the fire, there was a sound, thin, quiet. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his coat. He went out and stood at the cave's entrance. A voice came to him and said, "Why are you here, Elijah?" If I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. If I give away everything that I have and hand over my own body to feel good about what I've done, but I don't have love, I receive no benefit whatsoever. Love is patient. Love is kind. It isn't jealous. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It isn't rude. It doesn't seek its own advantage. It isn't irritable. It doesn't keep a record of complaints. It isn't happy with injustice, but it is happy with the truth. Love puts up with all things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. Love never fails. As for prophecies, they will be brought to an end. As for tongues, they will stop. As for knowledge, it will be brought to an end. We know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, which is partial, will be brought to an end. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, reason like a child, think like a child, but now that I have become a man, I put an end to childish things. Now we see a reflection in a mirror. Then we will see face to face. Now I know partially, but then I will know completely, in the same way that I've been completely known. Now faith, hope, and love remain, these three things, and the greatest of these is love. Pompeius Magnus in 63 AD was the first of our countrymen to subdue the Jews. Availing himself of the right of conquest, he entered the temple, he approached the Holy of Holies, and pulled back the curtain to find that the space was unattended, vacant of any gods. It thus became widely known that the sanctuary was an empty place, and the shrine had nothing to reveal.
A chance earlier, we didn't have the bulletin ready, or we had the bulletin ready before Lauren had joined in with us, and so I want to introduce Lauren Farlow, who's the daughter of our members here, Emily and John Augustat, and we are so glad that she's joining us on the ukulele. I'm excited because I think this is the beginning of a ukelution. You know, it's going to start here, and then the world's going to change, so glad to have you.
It's not your trash. Everyone is fundamentally lonely. Sometimes it comes out as rage. Screaming in a store, they're lonely at the core. So be calm when you engage. Everyone is fundamentally lonely. I'm not saying to sacrifice. Lend some support at the airport. It won't kill you to be nice. Everything is stupid. Success is a projection. We're all quietly helpless. Being nice is a connection. Blaring your car horn won't make you feel tremendous. But picking up something someone dropped will make this whole thing less horrendous. Everyone is fundamentally lonely, even ones pretending they're not. Be nice today, it'll make things just slightly okay on this lonely little blue dot.
Oops. I've often said that we all are walking around with this sign upon our chest, right? This idea, this sign that says, "Love me." And Doesn't matter where we are or what success we've had, it's still there. And if it's not there for us, if it's not there for us and we're feeling quite confident in our connection with others, we'll still go through those times where that sign is there. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it was more apparent, right? If we were all just wearing it. We all acknowledged our vulnerability together. So I love this song. I'd never heard this song before, 21 Pilots, but Stressed Out. But we came across it. Sharm's out of town visiting family in Chicago, and Sharm and Brad and I found this song, and it just seemed to fit. I wish I found some better sounds no one's ever heard. I wish I had a better voice that sang better words. I wish I found chords that in an order that is new. I wish I didn't have to rhyme every time I sang, which I thought that was wonderful. I was told when I got older my fears would shrink, but now I'm insecure. I care what people think. My name's Blurryface, and I care what people think. Wish you could turn back time to the good old days when Mama sang us to sleep. Now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time. Used to dream of outer space, but now they're laughing at our face, saying, "Wake up. You need to make money." So I've been talking about the Bible, and we're finishing up this idea of what is the Bible, and I'm kind of dancing around this whole thing. I know that actually my wife Linda and I, mostly Linda, but I'm going to join in, and we'll add some different perspectives on this. But she's doing a new series. It'll be on Thursdays. There's also one for young adult women on I forget what days that is. You can check out at the Welcome Center as we look at the fall programs. But the study is going to be on Rob Bell's book, What is the Bible? And a more in-depth kind of look, and I hope you'll consider participating in one of those options as well, to just have more fun looking more deeply at this. So we've just been dancing around sort of some curious stories and trying to get at what this book really is. But today I want to suggest something more generalized about why this book seems to be important, why this book sometimes gets so misused and abused, or completely, totally refused. See how I rhymed that? That's like spontaneous improv. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. So before we can begin with this, here's what I want us to think. First of all, I want you to realize something, and I know that most of you do this, but I also want this especially for visitors and those of you who know me well, that this space, I just got through spending a weekend in Oklahoma City with spiritual refugees from all sorts of denominations who'd come together with this individual, Peter Rollins, to sort of explore what does faith mean to us now that what it used to mean doesn't make any sense anymore. And it was fascinating to listen to all these different individuals, some clergy, some lay people, about 75 folks, and all sort of trying to figure out, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what we're about. We're about this thing that starts with the answer and then begins to question, right? And the whole idea is to encourage reflection. Seriously, if you come into this space looking for answers or hoping to have the answers you brought with you confirmed, then you should probably go somewhere else. That's not who I am. I'm quite comfortable living in the midst of the question. In fact, I think it's probably something we need to do even more so in our culture today, where answers seem so defined and so defensive that you can't really get to the answer, right? So what we're going to start with then is this idea of where do we begin when we look at what the Bible means. But to do that, we have to look at what we mean. And so when I say that, what I mean is we see ourselves as fundamentally lonesome, but we also see ourselves as fundamentally lacking. It's part of our existential dilemma. And no matter how just like the song was singing it, doesn't matter if you don't believe it or if you say it's not true, it's still true. We still have this sense that there's a gap in who we are. There's this existential sort of reality that there's something between who we see ourselves as and something how we see we should be, or we would hope to be, or we would believe that we need to be, no matter, perhaps as a part of our faith declaration. But there is this fundamental gap, this existential gap. And I think we have to start there as we start thinking about what it is to think about the Bible. We live between this space between who we are and who we think we ought to be. And what we find is that this anxiety becomes the motivation. This anxiety becomes the motivation for so much that we do, so much that we deny, so much that we avoid, so much that we fabricate because of this existential dilemma. I've read something recently, and maybe you all can relate to this. We live in a selfie culture, right? Increasingly. When we were on the Irish trip, it was always fascinating to me to walk around these amazing sites, right? This monastic site that was 2,000 years old, 1,500 years old, you know. And then I'd see people taking pictures of themselves up against it. And then it will get posted immediately online to see how many people will respond to it. It totally speaks to this reality of connection, this need to be connected. But it can get to the extreme, right? When Linda and I were visiting in France, and we were in Paris, and we visited the Louvre, and the Mona Lisa was there. I mean, the crowds were amazing, right, getting to the Mona Lisa, and we passed by all these amazing sculptures from the Roman era. But what you would always see is you'd always see people wait till it cleared, then they'd jump in front, and they'd lay down next to the statue that was laying down, and they'd take a picture of themselves. Or they'd finally get to the front where the Mona Lisa is, and then they'd take a picture of themselves with the Mona Lisa. And then move on. And Peter and I were watching this amazing site at Glendalough on our second day there, in this ancient monastic site, and there was a bagpipe player, an older woman playing the most amazing, haunting, beautiful music through this bagpipe, and then singing these lilting songs in Gaelic. And these crowds would come by, right, and then just snap the picture and then keep on moving, and then somebody would sort of get down there and then, you know, take a picture and then keep on moving. And I remember looking at Peter and going like, boy, the magic, they just keep on walking past, you know, all this amazing thing and just keep walking. But it's because at our core, I think that we're not in touch with this reality. We're not in touch with this existential sort of dilemma that we face. So we live in this selfie culture that tries to bridge that gap. I'll just put that up here. Just the selfie reality. Here's something to be thinking about, though. As the selfie reality becomes more real, it becomes more apparent that it's less real, right? And then we see what's going on with our country. Increasingly, we are less real. We are more fabricated with one another and more distant. So we start wearing these signs maybe that say, love me, which is at the heart of this existential dilemma. When we were in Derry and we were walking the wall around Derry, this wall that sort of divided the Protestant inside from the Catholic outside, which is now open because of the peace process, and yet the reality of the pain, Bloody Sunday took place right out there. 20 people killed when they were just marching in a protest, their usual annual protest. Paratroopers landed, shot people, and it began in earnest, the conflict that had been going on since 1916. And it became a conflicted, bloodied area. But it had been there since the 1600s when the wall was put up, this division between the Protestants and the Catholics, this ancient history. So there's a guy standing up on top with his wife, and there's these actors up on top, right? And these actors are sort of portraying various levels. There are people dressed in British Army uniforms and some marching band playing the drum, then the fife and the pipes for the British side. And then on another side, there's an Irish prisoner and a British guard, and a guy with his wife walks up and says, honey, let's get a picture of the prisoner. And then he looks at the prisoner and says, can you make it look painful? But that's part of this existential dilemma. We're caught in this inability to really understand who we are and who we're meant to be, or if we're meant to be anything, and in the process, we live in this world of disassociation. We live in this world of disconnection and this illusion. Another great example I heard recently is this story about a guy who's trapped on a desert island, right? He's been there for 10 years. Finally, somebody shows up and is ready to save him. But they notice there's these 3 structures on the island. There's these 3 little buildings. And they say, well, you know, you've been here by yourself, but you got kind of industrious. That's amazing. So what are these buildings? And he said, well, this first one is my home. That's where I live, this hut where I live. He said, the second one is the church. It's the church where I go and I pray. And they said, well, what's this third one? He said, well, that's the church I used to go to. I hate that place. Right? I mean, the reality is we run from things. Now, we got people who are transferring their membership today and joining. I'm not talking about you people. But the reality is that we don't think, we don't reflect on where we are, the context of who we are in the place that where we are. We tend to approach it and appropriate it from this existential conflict. And because we are not in touch with it, honestly, and I speak in a general universal term about people, when we're not in touch with it, everything else comes up, right? Our ideals come up because they're reflected off of that longing that we have, so they come up. And what happens to those ideals? We get defensive. Why do we get defensive? Because we haven't really bridged this gap. We're trying to bridge it in different ways, but we become defensive because to admit it, to deal with it openly, is to be quite vulnerable. And so we have this illusion that we are something when in fact we're not. We create narratives around this. I'm going to skip ahead here and talk about beliefs. This is where we also come in here. And this has to do with the Bible, has to do with faith. We hold certain beliefs. It's interesting in our text. If you look at Paul's writings, Paul says nothing about beliefs. He rarely says anything about beliefs. Everything he talks about has to do with behavior and action. The only thing Paul speaks about is being crucified with Christ. We'll get to that in just a second. But he never says anything about belief. The only time he brings up beliefs or laws is when he's trying to tell people to get past them, right? You have eating codes. These people don't eat the same way we do. These people aren't circumcised. I was going to say taken care of, but I'll go ahead and say the word. These people aren't circumcised. And so there's all these rules and these laws, and Paul says, move past all that. This is something different. It's interesting in our culture today how much we hook ourselves around, how much we anchor ourselves around beliefs. But now most of you all in here would probably say, yeah, the Bible, we don't really believe in the Bible as being magical and this sort of thing, like we can open it up and it's a spell book. But there was a group that did an interesting scientific study at University of Idaho, I think it was, but it was up in the north, I forget exactly which one. But the psychologists called in students and adults who'd volunteered to be victims of the experiments. And they'd said, how many of you believe in magic? Right? And so, most of the hands said no. They didn't raise their hand. One or two hands went up. But then when he qualified it, it's like, you really believe that I can make things reappear and disappear in reality? And they're like, no, okay, no. So everyone finally agreed that ultimately they didn't really believe in magic, even as entertaining as it would be. And so he said, fine, what I'd like is for some of you all to look in your purses or in your wallets and find a picture of a loved one. Who has a picture of a loved one? And about a dozen or so people came up with pictures. They showed the pictures. He said, I want you to come up on the stage. He said, what I have here in this envelope is I have a 15th century Wiccan incantation from a book of spells from Salem, Massachusetts, the 16th century, and it's a curse that you could incant on anyone you should choose. So what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to recite this curse on your relative here, and none of them would do it. And it's like, well, nothing's going to happen, right? But they're not going to do it. Because deep down, we hold suspicions. Paul Tillich said that religion had often become suspicion and not true religion. That in fact, it had become based in suspiciousness. So that even though we might say, of course not, there is this deep-seated discomfort. And because of that discomfort, we become suspicious. It represents so much of who we are in terms of how we see ourselves. The reality is that most people don't really know what they believe. We tend to compartmentalize it. We tend to bifurcate it, holding beliefs in one place and experiences and our choices in another place, because in all honesty, reflecting on these things is challenging. Letting go of some of these hard-held ideas simply because we believe that they have something to do with what we can't understand. We hold tightly to them. It's hard to face those things. It's hard to begin to challenge those things, to take them apart, to be open. And then we start wondering, well, if we don't hold on to that, I recently spoke with somebody who said, well, if you don't hold the Bible as literal, then what do you have to stand on? Life, beauty, wonder, mystery, love, compassion. But you see, it doesn't fill this gap when the mystery is not addressed. When the mystery is avoided, we cling to concrete stuff because we don't want to deal with the mystery. This is what Paul Tillich said about fundamentalists. He said, fundamentalists are so very sure, but when you talk to fundamentalists, if you don't speak the language or agree with the ideas, suddenly the beliefs begin to feel like arguments, and they become uncomfortable and sort of a defensiveness. Now, granted, that can appeal to some people because this defensiveness seems to be sure, it seems to be solid, and so people might be attracted to that because of the same existential dilemma. But what Paul Tillich says, what fundamentalism really is, it's not certainty in belief. Fundamentalism is not certainty, but it is repressed uncertainty. Wow, I thought that was interesting when I reminded myself of that. I hadn't read Tillich in a long time. Fundamentalism is not certainty, it's repressed uncertainty. And if you think about it, when you think about these ideals and beliefs which become defensive, what happens? People don't actually get to their ideal self. They just build a wall that sort of protects them from having to deal with that reality. And when that reality gets confronted, of course, is when we experience some tragedy, some conflict, or perhaps just a deeper question that we begin to pursue and things begin to fall apart in the house of cards. But if it's a conflict, if it's a loved one who you find out, wait a minute, you're gay. I love you. How can I love you? You're gay. Or you did this. How can I truly love you if you did this? When we're confronted with existential dilemmas, this thing begins to fall apart. It doesn't come to an answer. It just begins to fall apart, this wall. And so this wall can get really thick with beliefs and with defensiveness. And what Paul Tillich says, and what Freud also said later, or earlier than Paul Tillich, was Freud said that the ancillary to this is that folks who often are defensive about this are deep down wishing they were like you, wishing they didn't have to hold on to this defensiveness. Because when you're free of this defensiveness, when you're open to more of the mystery, it is far less anxious than it is to hold on to the defensiveness. Isn't that an interesting idea? This, by the way, is called, technical term is reaction formation. We react and form ideas based on that reaction. But again, it's still based on this basic existential dilemma that we're not who we're supposed to be. Churches wedded to the idea of prosperity gospel are another great example. This is interesting to me. Joel Osteen, okay, I'm going to step on a few toes. But I've said this before in groups, if I'm not stepping on everybody's toe at some point, then I'm not doing my job, right? Because the reality of who we are in here is this reality of being present to the mystery and not being defensive about what's right or wrong. Because what is above that is love. Above all the other things, love is the greatest of all. So how do we get there if we're already defensive, if we're already building this wall? How do we get there? So I'm going to step on a few toes, and I'm going to talk about the prosperity church. Number one being, I think it's Lakewood, isn't it Lakewood? Is that Joel Osteen's? I thought you were a big fan of Joel. I know. Anyway, I'm kidding. So I believe it's Joel Osteen's church. But so here's the interesting thing about prosperity. If you did a study here and compared us to Lakewood Church per capita, percentage-wise, there would not be any more people who have experienced prosperity and wealth in that church than in this church or in any other church. What drives people to that message? It's the existential question. It's what's lacking. And what psychologists would say is it's not an addiction to prosperity. It's like gambling. It's not an addiction to gambling. You're not addicted to winning. You're addicted to losing. The prosperity gospel is not addicted to prosperity. It's addicted to the longing for prosperity. That's what keeps people coming. That's the fish hook out there, the bait. My father was a gambler. a terrible addicted gambler, would lose tons of money. He never thought about that. He'd always tell me the money he won. He'd say, I won $30,000 this last weekend. I'd say, awesome. So how many times? He goes, I go every other week, gambling. How much have you lost? He said, well, I don't like to think about that. But I won $30,000. And I thought, well, it's not that. You're not keeping and going back and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars because you're waiting for that one win. You're losing because you're addicted to the losing. You keep going back because you're addicted to the losing. The people who continue in difficult relationships that are abusive or destructive or in addictions are not addicted to finding the answer. They're addicted to the conflict. They're stuck in this cycle of thinking there has to be something else that I need to be. So here's the idea. I loved this piece from Tacitus, which said when Pompey went in, Pompey Magnus went in 93 and 63 BC, when the Roman Empire defeated Jerusalem and took over Jerusalem. And he walked into the temple, and he pulled back the curtain, the Holy of Holies, right? You have the Gentile court, and then you have the Pharisaic and Jewish leaders, and then you have the Holy of Holies, where you don't go in there but once a year. On the Day of Atonement. But he burst through and opened up the curtain, and there was nothing there, he said. It was empty, untenanted, no God's present. And here's the interesting thing that Paul says. That's exactly the point. Because when you realize that this whole format is what we call a false dichotomy. Thank you, Augustine, in the 3rd and 4th century, and the Council of Nicaea. When you realize that this dichotomy, that there is something incomplete that we need to happen in order to be complete, you have suddenly crucified that reality, that crisis. You have literally hung that crisis on the cross, died to it. Which is why Paul can say we're crucified, because none of that stuff matters. Love is what matters. Love is at the heart of who we are called to be. In all of the conflicts that he deals with communities, the final answer is you have to love one another. It's hard for us to get there. Paul Tillich said this is the hardest thing for us to do. Accept our acceptance. So I want the band to come on up here. I'm going to conclude with one final thought here. And as we do, could you help me move this off to the side? Yeah. The skeptic who says there's nothing behind the curtain, and the believer who defends with all of her or his heart that there is something behind that curtain, both have it wrong. Because there's nothing there. What is crucified is this sudden need that something has to be there. We are already in the heart of grace. We are already in the heart of God's being. God is already in the heart of our being. When Paul says you have to learn to love one another and you have to be patient, when we talk about forgiveness, which is paying that debt, which is also that false dichotomy, that something has to be filled there to pay a debt, it's just like Satanism. It's the Satan telling Jesus, if you want this, do this and I'll give you this. It's the same practice. That's not what the gospel is about. The good news of the gospel is about the fact that you don't do anything except accept your acceptance. At the heart of our reality is that we exist here to be connected to one another. How is God made real in the world? Show compassion. You'll experience it. How do we forgive one another? It never happened. It's not even like, yeah, I'll forgive you this time. I get a second chance. It's not even, I've decided not to hold this against you. It's like it never happened. To live patiently is to simply live out of an openness that says, you're wearing that same sign I'm wearing. No matter what you do, you're wearing that same sign I'm wearing. that begins to bridge that gap. Amen.
Here I am without a message. Here I stand with empty hands. Just a spirit tired of wandering like a stranger in this land. Walking wide-eyed through this world is the only way I've known. Wrapped in hope and good intentions, bare to the bone. There is nothing I won't show you. There's nothing I can hide. I've risked it all and dreamt it all, and seldom questioned why. When I was hungry, when my spirit ached and groaned, laid wide open and defenseless, bare to the bone. When I rise in glory. If I do by grace. Time will wash away our footprints, and we'll leave without a trace. Between here and now and forever is such precious little time. What we do in love and kindness is all we'll ever leave behind. When the light is slowly fading and my eyes are softly waning, when the evening sun is setting and the world is barely breathing, then your voice will call me and your hand will lead me home, like a newborn, odd and naked, bare to the bone. When I rise in glory. If I do by grace. Time will wash away our footprints, and we'll leave without a trace. Between here and now and forever is such precious little time. What we do in love and kindness is all we'll ever leave behind. Here I am without a message. Here I stand with empty hands. Just a spirit tired of wandering like a stranger in this land. Walking wide-eyed through this world is the only way I've known. Wrapped in hope and good intentions, bare to the bone. Wrapped in hope and good intentions, bare to the bone.
It's so nice to have Claire do it, singing with us. You know what I love about this worship service is to watch things grow. I just like to watch things blossom, and so just your voice is just, you continually surprise us. It's so good to have you all here. Let's stand for blessing. Thanks to Avery for joining us, who comes over from the choir every now and then. Because honestly, she likes it better in here. No, I'm kidding. She got a great voice to do it all. So let's hold hands. Oh, wait, I almost forgot. Let's bring forward Charlotte Mashaw, please come on forward, and the McMullins, too. Y'all come on forward here. I want to welcome a couple of our newest members. Where are the McMullins? Are they still? Oh, here, they're coming up over here. So Charlotte is joining by transfer. Charlotte Mashaw, many of you know her. She's been visiting with us for a while. And then the McMullins, Martha and Bill, are joining by transfer from another church. And they're active in our first talks as well upstairs, and so we're glad to have all of you. I would ask you all this question that we ask everyone joining the United Methodist Church: will you continue to uphold this church and this community with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, and your services, and your witness? Well, we're glad to have you. It's good to have you guys here. Thanks for being in this community. And I'm going to ask them to stand up here after we sing. I want y'all to come on up and say hello to them and welcome them as well. So let's take a hand here and join together. And stick around and sing this wonderful We Must Be the Change. Let's pray. Holy One, bless us as we go from this place. We are mindful of the pain in the world. We are mindful of the challenges of simply being present to one another in this world. But remind us that we are all we need to be love with one another, and that we might be that light of hope as we challenge defensiveness, as we bring a message that's openness and compassion. Bless us as we go from this place. We pray in the name of in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Darkness,
I cannot drive out darkness. Tell every child, woman and man, only light can drive out darkness. So after people, only light.